President Biden and Israel's Prime Minister Yair Lapid have signed a joint statement pledging to deny Iran nuclear weapons. The statement says Washington would make available the use of all elements of US national power. And speaking to journalists afterwards, Mr. Lapid said force was needed to protect freedom against those who don't play by the rules, and a credible military threat would stop Iran from developing its nuclear program. For more on this, joined tonight by Aaron David Miller, who worked at the US Department of State for 24 years and served 6 secretaries of state and as an advisor on Arab-Israeli negotiations. Aaron, welcome to the programme. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
So talks between Iran and the West to restore a 2015 nuclear deal haven't progressed for months. And you've got this stalemate in which Tehran and Washington are essentially pointing the finger and blaming each other for this. Is there more to this latest announcement than a symbolic declaration?
You're talking about the U.S. Israeli Jerusalem Declaration?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it reflects a couple of things. Number one, it reflects Joe Biden's emotional and political commitment to Israel, which is deeply buried in his DNA. And unlike his former boss, Barack Obama, who passed up a chance to visit Israel the first year in his term, Biden was invited by former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett to come. He accepted the invitations. It never hurts an American president to travel to Israel before midterm elections in November. I think the Jerusalem Declaration was designed essentially to convey the sense that the U.S. Israel relationship, whatever disagreements there are behind closed doors, and there are disagreements, is not only functional, but is being in the right direction from a political point of view in terms of Mr. Biden's own political interests. And there's a fair amount of coordination, cooperation on the one issue that hovers over this entire trip, which is Iran. I think the Israelis, and no amount of handshake smiles or soaring rhetoric can the fact that Israel and the U.S. have a significant agreement on the means to stop Iran from achieving a nuclear weapon. Mr. Biden talks in terms of preventing Iran from acquiring a weapon. The Israelis are convinced if is the objective, there's going to have to be much more effort made at an early stage of the process, because once the Iranians begin to enrich uranium at 90%, which is weapons grade, they've passed a critically important red line. And it's unclear to me, and I'm not so sure the Israelis or the Americans have defined each in their own way what those red lines are. Mr. Biden did put a kinetic piece to the puzzle by saying that he would use force to stop Iran from acquiring a weapon. So the beat on this one's going to go on. There is no solution to Iran's putative search for at least to become a nuclear power. Even if the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is rejoined, the reality is it's only a major problem that the United States has no solution for. Iran is right now a threshold state, and they can, if they chose, make the decision to weaponize. So this is going to be an extremely difficult the trajectory, and this is very difficult. And I'm quite pessimistic that we can being able to avoid a serious Israeli-Iranian confrontation that could draw the United States in coming months.
That's very interesting. You touched on this shift under President Biden's leadership, but just elaborate a bit more, if you would, on the Israeli-Palestinian-US policy and how things have shifted under Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, the administration inherited 2 peace processes, one between Israelis and Palestinians, which is fundamentally broken and dysfunctional for any number of reasons. And a second peace process, one that was initiated during the Trump years, which resulted in September 2020 in the signing of the Abraham Accords, which created very close relations between Israel and the Emirates, Israelis and the Bahrainis, an upgrade in relations between Israel and Morocco, and given the complexity of Sudanese politics, beginnings of Israel's relationship with Sudan. So the Biden administration comes to Washington and has to make a decision. What are they going to invest in? Well, the Israeli-Palestinian negotiating process is broken, and having I can't tell you how many meetings, summits, and failed peace plans over the course of 20 plus years working for Democratic and Republican administrations. The idea of the administration putting a plan on the table would be pure folly and would result in failure. So it became a management issue on the Israeli-Palestinian side. On the other piece, that's the one that was functional and far less risky politically. The administration has clearly made a decision to invest in one of the few initiatives of their predecessor, Mr. Trump, that they would consider successful. And you're going to see some of that in the next day or so when the Biden trip arrives in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. There's going to be an announcement. I'm sure the president is going to make it. The deal's already been done. Improvement in Israeli-Saudi. There'll be overflight rights, which will save Israeli commercial airlines an enormous amount of money and time on flights to Asia. There may be an announcement to allow Israeli Arabs, Palestinians who are Muslim, to make the Hajj. And there will be an agreement to complete the transfer of two islands, which the Egyptians transferred to the Saudis in 2018, but the process needed Israeli assent in order to complete it because these islands, Tiran and Sanafir, flanked the Straits of Tiran. According to the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, 1970, there were members of the Multinational Force Observer. That's the monitoring force that's been in place since the early 80s, based in Rome, that monitors the terms of the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty. So that deal will be done. It'll represent a modest improvement in the road to what folks hope to a normalization of Israeli-Saudi relations. I will hold my breath on that latter point. I think it's going to be quite a while before that takes place. But again, the Biden administration invested in the interstate dimension of the process. Israel, I want to expand the circle as well.
Aaron, a slightly jittery line here, but let's persevere and hope it becomes a little better. Just kind of getting a gist of what you were saying there. Tomorrow, President Biden is set to travel to Bethlehem to hold talks with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. And speaking on Israeli TV, Channel 12 TV in Israel, Biden was asked about the description of Israel as an apartheid state, which he described as views which were few and wrong. How significant is it to hear the U.S. president say that?
Well, I think he's fundamentally disagreed with the view of several human rights organizations, Amnesty International and others. In fact, the British Amnesty International and many other human rights organizations that have basically deemed this to be Israel to be an apartheid state. Biden's pushed back. He doesn't believe it. There may well be a small number of Democratic progressives in his party that believe that. So this wasn't significant at all. I think it's essentially business as usual. I wouldn't have expected Biden to do anything else other than to push back against that proposition.
Okay, and just a final thought from you, if I may, and fingers crossed the line stays on our side. You touched on Joe Biden flying to Saudi Arabia from Israel. How significant is it for the US president to be travelling out to Saudi Arabia and to be doing that amid so much controversy with human rights in that part of the world and building relationships with a part of the world that has seen real strains with the Western world in recent years?
Well, this is the most fraught aspect of the trip, the most politically costly for Mr. Biden. Congress, the human rights community, the Washington Post, the media are very unhappy with this because Mr. Biden appears to be contradicting his campaign words that Saudi Arabia was a pariah, the leadership had a little social redeeming. He once referred to Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, as a thug. I think there's a sense that Biden is very conflicted about this. He's responding to those who have pressed him to understand that, unlike Lehman Brothers, the U.S. Saudi relationship is probably too important to fail. And he's been under pressure. And I think he understands the need to make this dysfunctional relationship over the past 18 months functional. But he can't avoid the fact that he is going to participate in the rehabilitation of Mohammed bin Salman, a ruthless authoritarian whose human rights record is, reads like a chapter out of an Edgar Allan Poe novel, horror story. And the real question for me, John McCain argued that our interests are our values and our values are our interests. He saw no difference between these. So human rights is not some separate component. It is integrally related to how America promotes its own credibility in the world. I think the interesting question for me is, will Mr. Biden publicly talk about Saudi Arabia human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia? Will he privately present the Saudis with a set of metrics that he would hope that they would honor in terms of releasing dissidents, particularly U.S. Saudi nationals who are detained and or imprisoned in Saudi Arabia and prevented from leaving the country? So this is fraught for him, and I think it represents a that has basically characterized American foreign policy through much of its history, which is the conflict between promoting American interests on one hand and trying to be consistent in promoting human rights, promotion of democratic values on the other. And no administration that I have ever been a part of elevated human rights to a central, let alone preeminent place in the formation of its policies. And we're now seeing, sadly, Joe Biden is very conflicted about this visit. The happy part of this trip is over. His meetings with Mahmoud Abbas may be polite, but they won't be terribly pleasant given the gap that exists between what Abbas wants, what the Israelis are prepared to deliver. And the trip to Saudi is going to be complicated as well, as he confronts the reality that one picture is worth 1,000 years. And that handshake, that embrace, whatever interaction that is between he and Mohammed bin Salman is going to be something that will help define the Biden presidency.
Really interesting to see some of the reporting on this, also reflecting on who will welcome him into Saudi Arabia, whether it will be a lesser ranked member of the royal family, and what can be taken from that. Any significance there for you, just finally, Aaron?
No, I think, look, the king is and Mohammed bin Salman is a crown prince, but he's the de facto ruler of the country, full stop. So the king at the front of the line, to center of the meeting with the crown prince. But once ceremonial meetings conclude, I suspect Biden will be dealing directly with Mohammed bin Salman. He's gone to extreme lengths, the president, to deny that the reason he's going is to meet the crown prince. He's talked about he's going to an international meeting. He's going to see 9 countries. He'll meet with the Gulf Cooperation Council, plus Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt. So he's very uncomfortable with this. And I don't think it's going to be a happy day for him on Friday, Saturday.
Yeah, indeed. Listen, we will leave it there. Thank you ever so much for joining us and persevering through a slightly jittery line. Aaron David Miller, who worked at the US Department of State for 24 years and served 6 secretaries of state as an advisor on Arab-Israeli negotiations. Really good to get your insight. It's just coming up to 21 minutes past 11. Remember, there are plenty of ways that you can listen to Times Radio. We have a free app for your smartphone. You can also listen on our website and play Times Radio on your smart speaker too. Of course, we're on DAB digital radio, which you can get at home or in the car. And if you can't find us on your DAB radio, just rescanning it should do the trick. If you have any issues, there is a really helpful how to listen guide, which you'll find on our website. You can also email feedback@times.radio for help. You're listening to Raya El Salahi on Times Radio.